Hey everyone, this is That Guy in Hutch, Jason Probst, and you're listening to That Podcast in Hutch. Today, you may notice some sounds on this. I don't know if we'll edit all this out, but we are actually in the back room of Sandhills Brewing, and so there's a lot of machinery going on. And my guest today is Pippin Williamson, and I really have wanted to talk with him for a long time because the path to getting this brewery set up and getting it established has been fascinating to me. It's my favorite brewery in the world. A lot of my friends feel the same way, and I have told people since they were back in this back room and all you could do is come fill a growler that what these guys do with beer is nothing short of art. So Pippin, thanks for being on today.
It is my pleasure, Jason.
So tell me, let's just get right to it. Tell me, why do you like beer?
So there's a couple of answers to that. So I'm going to give you two quick ones. The first is I fell in love with beer as a beverage and as a product and something as a consumable in 2011, 2012-ish, shortly after I graduated college. And it was never a part of my life at any point growing up until then. You know, my parents didn't drink beer. None of my siblings did. I had very little exposure to beer in college. You know, yeah, I was the same as just about every other college student. I went to a couple of college parties or two, but really I never fell in love with beer at any point up until shortly after I graduated college. I was working from home, working remotely, and I started getting into going to a couple of our local area bars and breweries. In this case, it was in Lawrence, Kansas. And I fell in love with the ambiance, and I fell in love with going out on a nice spring or summer day and sitting on the patio and having a couple and then going home. And that was kind of my introduction. I initially fell in love with a beer called Boulevard Wheat, made by Boulevard Brewing Company up in Kansas City. And then just started exploring a bunch of others and suddenly realized that a passion I didn't know existed was there. And I started wanting to explore all of the different flavors and styles of beers. And it was wonderful. It was a wonderful world. It was kind of at the right time of the craft beer movement in this area for sure, because breweries were starting to open up in Kansas City, in Lawrence, and the other areas that I was around. And I was also in a really prime time of my work world in that I was traveling a lot. I was traveling all over the country. And so anytime I was going to another city in another state or another country, I would go and visit the local brewery in that area or breweries. And I love the adventure. It was super fun, and it just kind of exposed me to this world that I didn't know existed. And then the second reason, or the second answer, is that once I fell in love with beer as a product and as a consumable, I fell in love with the craft of actually making and producing beers. And that one was really by accident and was kind of actually my wife's fault. I don't know if she regrets it today or not, but she bought me a homebrew kit for Christmas because apparently I was bored and I needed a hobby. I worked remotely on a computer and I had long hours in front of the screen, and I needed something that was somewhat tangible or that I could explore and play with. And so she bought me a homebrew kit, and I made some of the worst, most mediocre beer you could possibly imagine, but I had a great time. I made a horrible mess in the kitchen, but it was really fun. It was great. And then I got connected to a couple of friends that were also starting to explore brewing on their own, and I went and spent a couple of days with them hanging out, and I just fell down the rabbit hole. Suddenly, I've always liked chemistry, but I have never had a really strong background or knowledge of any of the sciences related to brewing. Definitely no food sciences, no chemistry, no fermentation arts. But I loved the very approachable science aspects of brewing, where I could start experimenting with different grains, I could experiment with different yeasts, and I could experiment with different temperatures, and it just, I don't know, it was just something that I really fell in love with, and it kind of took over my basement and it took over my garage, and so it was great.
Well, let's talk about, there's a couple other things I want to get to, but this seems like a good time to get right to this, because there's a lot to brewing beer, and I know you and I have had a couple of conversations to talk about how kind of specific you've been about it, even going down to, I know you've done like a chemical profile of your water to make sure that no matter what, you can recreate that water.
Yes.
But for people out there who don't know anything about the beer brewing process, can you kind of walk us through some of that a little bit?
So first of all, the process of brewing beer is actually dramatically simpler than I think some people imagine it to be. It's not that different from, say, baking a cake. We start with our grain, and those are usually barley and wheat and sometimes oats or corn or a few other grains. We soak it in water, and we extract flavors and sugars out of that grain. Then we take the extracted sugars and flavors, we boil it, we sterilize it, we do a cooking process on it. During that cooking process, we add in other ingredients, usually hops, but sometimes spices and herbs and other flavoring agents. We usually boil it for about an hour, and then after that, we transfer it into a vessel where we add yeast to it, and we allow the yeast to consume all the sugars. The yeast is a living organism, and it consumes sugars and produces alcohol. That process takes about 2 weeks or so. And then during that fermentation process, we may or may not add additional hops or other ingredients, fruits, for example, based on the beer that we're creating. And then for the vast majority of beers, it's about a 2-week process. Once it goes through the fermentation process, we kind of go through a conditioning stage where we chill the beer down, we carbonate it, we get rid of sediment and clarify the beer. And then once it's carbonated, we put it into a package, whether that be a can, a bottle, or a keg, and it's ready to serve. Mm-hmm. And it's usually about a 2-week process.
But there are some beers that, I talked earlier about you guys being artful with your beers. So there are things you do, you barrel age beers, you throw Sandhill plums, that's now the state fruit. But you make a kind of a mash out of that, and you put that in, and then that extends that a little bit because you're always kind of playing with things.
So, right? When I say it takes about 2 weeks for a beer, those are what we would consider kind of our standard, our everyday beers that we make throughout the year. Sometimes they're one-off batches, but we also do a lot of experimentation, a lot of specialty beers where we'll take a fruit. Let's pick on Sandhill plums for a moment, and we will create a base beer for that, and then we'll add the fruit to the beer and allow it to go through a re-fermentation process where it's extracting colors and flavors and additional sugars out of the fruit and creating something completely different than what the base beer was. And that can definitely extend that time. Sometimes it extends it by a week. Sometimes it extends it by 18 plus months. Mm-hmm. We do a lot of oak aging with beers where we take oak barrels that typically come from a winery or a distillery, sometimes bourbon barrels, scotch barrels, tequila barrels, red wine, white wine, brandy, etc. And we'll take a beer based off. We'll take a barrel, and then based on what that barrel is, whether it's a bourbon barrel or a red wine barrel, we'll pick a beer that's going to go into that, and it will go through an aging process in the barrel where it slowly extracts character out of the barrel. So it's extracting some of the previous spirits. It is doing some micro-oxidation, and it's also extracting characters from the wood itself. That process can be anywhere from 1 month at minimum, typically, up to 24 plus months. I think our oldest one that we've ever done is about 3 years.
3-year process where it's kind of curing and aging.
Yep.
And what beer was that?
Well, it's probably still in the barrel. So we've got several. So one, for example, is we have inside of our tap room, we have what's called a fooder, which is a large oak barrel. Ours is about a 500-gallon barrel. And that was, we got that into the building right before we opened the tap room in October 2018. So we got it in the first week or so of October, and we filled it up, and it has never been emptied to this day. And so it's about 3.5, almost 4 years since then. We've never emptied it, but what we do is we pull a little bit out and we put new beer in. And so we do what's called kind of a Solera project, which is a term that comes from the wine world, which is this idea of blending old and new product together constantly. Mm. And so we have aspects of the old beer, we have aspects of the newer beer that as a blend, let's say there's 500 gallons in there, When we pull some out, we might pull out 30 gallons, we might pull out 120 gallons, and then we refill whatever we took out. And it creates an ever-changing, but also very consistent product. So it's used in the wine world, and probably to some degree in the spirits world, as a way to, one, embrace a change of a product over time, because no iteration is going to be exactly the same as the previous, but also to help create a more consistent product. Anytime you put something in oak barrels, you are embracing a certain amount of risk, spontaneity, and the kind of a dice roll that Mother Nature gives you. You know, you might have one oak barrel that's lovely, you might have another oak barrel that you filled at the exact same time from the same batch of base beer, and your results are totally different. And so a Solera method in a large oak vessel is kind of a way to help ensure some consistency.
Wow. That's out in the tap room, right?
Yes, it is.
We see that all the time. And just I want to make sure I walk through, and then I want to get back to your home brewing days. I've loved watching the progress of this place. You were literally back in this room, and I could come back a few years ago and just get a growler filled, and that was all you could do. And then you opened a little bit of a sitting area and a little bit of a tap room, and now you have another room to the north, and I think you have plans to extend beyond that. And now you have a place up in Mission that I think your brother runs.
That's
right. So you're across the state. You have two different locations, but you're still using basically the same recipes and the same brewing techniques and the same water profile.
That's correct. So so originally when we started the project, it was my twin brother and I, and then we brought in a couple of other partners as well. But we had a problem, and we weren't really sure how to address it at first. But that problem was that I lived here in Hutchinson, and he lived in Kansas City, but we knew that we were doing this project together. It was either we're definitely opening breweries. I'm opening a brewery, and you are opening a brewery, or we're opening one together. But we also knew that neither of us was going to move because we both have established roots in each of these areas, in Kansas City and Hutchinson. We have family and spouses and in-laws in the areas, and so we knew that we weren't going to move. And so the conclusion we came to is, let's do one brewery, two locations. And so we were able to open up the Hutch Brewery first, and then exactly 1 year from opening the Hutchinson Brewery, we opened up one in Mission. They are the same brewery, or it's one business, two locations.
Okay.
We split beers back and forth. We share all the same recipes. We have the same themes. We have the same ethos. We are very much one business, not just in terms of our branding, our legalities, our finances, etc., but also in our operations. We are one business with two locations. And that's been really, really wonderful. It's been a fun way to do it. You know, yes, it has some interesting, unique challenges, but at this point, I definitely have no regrets on that. Our method has always been, you were commenting about how watching it grow, how we started with just this one room and we served free samples and growlers, and then we added a small little tap room with a little bit of seating, and then we added to that tap room, and then it continued to expand, and then we expanded to Mission. So our model has been build very small and build as we go and expand as we go. It's very common, especially in our industry, to see places open up with hundreds of thousands or potentially millions of dollars of investment, and whether that is a bank financing it, it's private investment, it's your own personal funds, it's a whole bunch of partners coming together, it's crowdfunding, whatever the method, whatever the funding model, it's very common to do that and build out a crazy big facility that's beautiful and it's polished from day one. And there's nothing wrong with that. I have to commend anybody that does that, because number one, there's a lot of challenges and risks involved with that. But my brother and I and our other partners decided that was not our model. That was not what we wanted to do. We both came from a bootstrapped software business where bootstrapping in the tech world is a very common term that basically just means you build it yourself and you self-fund yourself with your own sales revenue. And so we wanted to kind of apply that to the brewery. And so we built really, really small. We basically bought the equipment that we could afford in cash. And then we said, okay, if we can make a little bit of beer and sell it, that beer will fund buying more equipment, more space, fund building a tap room, fund building tables, paying staff, putting HVAC units in, eventually replacing lights that are, half the lights in this room are dead. But it's all about the whole idea behind the business is that this is a self-funded, self-supporting business from day one. That's the way that we want to go. Zero debt to the best of our ability.
Yeah.
And we took a chance with that because, obviously debt has its own risk. Just like anytime that somebody goes out and buys a house or buys a car, there's risk associated with that. You never know what's going to change in your life. You lose your job, you default, whatever. There's the same risk when you finance a business. We had this, but we also have the same risks of if we self-fund everything and we build really small and we bootstrap it, what if we can't generate enough cash flow because we're too small? That was the risk that we decided to take on. But we decided that risk was better for our own personal tastes than the alternative. We kind of asked ourselves a very simple question. Well, it's not really a simple question, but it was a really important question, which was, what if we fail? Yeah. What if we fail after 2 years? And we agreed that whatever we have paid cash for, we can sell it at a loss and we can walk away.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, you can't walk away when you owe somebody else $400,000, $1,000,000, $500,000, $200,000, whatever it is to finance things. And so we decided we didn't want to be indebted to anybody.
Yeah. And it's really been clear to me that that's how you've done it. I mean, that you, even not knowing all the details of that, it was very, you've basically worked out of kind of a storage. This whole building that you're in is kind of a
it's a warehouse,
storage garage. Yeah, it is, right?
It was originally 5 storage garages to be exact.
And you started in this back one, and then actually way back you started your coding business back there, your programming business, and so you did that, and then you moved your brewer in here, and then you moved into that. So that kind of purposeful and very intentional decision to say, but so your risk. I mean, when you tell that story, what I hear you say is, we're going to take this chance, and there is a chance that you're not going to sell enough beer, right? That people,
they're not going to like what we make, or nobody can find us, or what have you.
But people did like what you made, and so they were buying it, and they bought it at a level enough that it allowed you to keep moving and expanding a little bit and moving things. So I love that story. The other thing I want to ask about is this home brewing process, because I think there was a phase where a lot of people were doing home brewing, right? Everybody was buying a kit. They were a Mr. Beer, and they were making their beer at home. But you were doing that. How did you were some of those first beers really terrible?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we had a bunch that were absolutely atrocious. But we also had a lot that we felt were really good. Not just because we personally wanted to drink them, but... Okay, so one of the challenges I had early on in homebrewing is I could not find enough people to help me drink my beer and try it.
Oh, yeah.
I had a problem where I liked brewing much more than I liked drinking. Mm-hmm. And so there was one point where I had hundreds of gallons of beer in my basement that I had brewed, and I didn't know what to do with it because I didn't have enough friends or family that were interested in it. And it wasn't just that they liked or didn't like what I brewed, they simply didn't drink any craft beer at all. And so it was a little bit of a challenge to get rid of some of it. But what I did, and what my brother did, and what other partners did, is we traveled a lot. We went to a lot of different places. We went to breweries around the world, around the country, and not just breweries, but we also went to beer bars and other places, and we drank a lot of different beers. And I feel like we had a really broad understanding and appreciation for different styles of beer and different qualities. And so we knew what was a good beer and what wasn't. Mm-hmm. And so when we started making our own, we made a lot of really crappy beer that, we either tortured ourselves by drinking it, or we dumped it down the drain, or, what have you. But we also knew what a really quality product was. And so when we did get it right in that brewing process, we knew it was right. And we knew that it was good. And so we were able to have a high level of confidence in our brewing skills and our knowledge of what a great beer was, that when it came time to figure out how to brew it on a bigger scale and brew it for public consumption, we really didn't have many worries about, is our beer good?
Mm-hmm.
And that might sound a little bit conceited, but it just came from a lot of experience of going and trying other places. And we used to, friends and my brother and our other partners, we would drive 8 hours, hop in the car to go to a bottle release of some obscure brewery down in Illinois,
mm-hmm.
or down to Texas or up to Nebraska. For these places that were supposedly doing world-renowned, world-class beers. And so we'd go get some, and we'd see what it was like.
But those are all creating data points for you, right?
Right.
As a brewer, you're building data points.
We had a massive data sheet.
And did you really, that says like, we like this and we like?
Oh no, we're not nearly organized enough.
But in your mind,
but our mind, we absolutely did.
Yeah, you knew what makes it. So what makes a good beer? I mean, there's different kinds of beer. You guys do a sour. I hadn't even heard of sour beers before you guys started making them. Like what kind of characteristics make a good beer? I know that can't really be universal.
It's a little bit of a complicated question because there's so many factors. Each of us has our own personal taste. What I like in a beer is going to be different than what you like in a beer, is different than what so-and-so likes in a beer. Some people like light beers, some people like dark beers, some people like hoppy beers. But if we step away from individual personal preferences for a moment, there are a number of factors that are really important in distinguishing a good beer from a bad beer at a statistical chemistry level, if you will. Number one is quality ingredients. You have to have high quality malts. You have to have high quality water. Water is a huge percentage of your beer, 90+%. And so if you have bad water, if it tastes like chlorine, it tastes like chloramines, or has other funky characters in it, those characters are going to carry through. Quality of your hops. Are they fresh hops? Are they old hops? Have they been oxidized? The quality of your yeast. Yeast is a living organism that is responsible for taking sugars that are available in a beer and turning them into alcohol, and also produces a lot of the final flavors and characters and aromas in a finished beer. If you don't have enough yeast, you get a bad fermentation. If you ferment it way too hot, you get a bad fermentation. If you ferment it too cold, you can get a bad fermentation. There's a lot of different factors. If you expose a finished beer to too much oxygen, if you don't do a quality conditioning time, all of these different factors. If we take it back to the bacon analogy for a moment, if we say what makes a good cake versus a bad cake, there's a lot of different things. Your ingredients are one of the most important. Your baking process is clearly important. If you cook it at 700 degrees, you're going to get a crisp. If you cook it at 200, it's going to be gooey inside. Beer is no different. You have these parameters that you need to follow through in your fermentation. You have your ingredients, and you need to have quality ingredients, and you also have to ensure that you allow enough time for all of those things to happen. Once again, going back to baking, if we say that we need to bake this cake for 45 minutes at 400 degrees, we can't just bake it at 750 for 20 minutes and assume it's going to come out the same way. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
We can't bake it for 2 hours at 200 degrees. Beer is not that different. So there's a lot of factors that go into making a quality beer. Then there's a lot more nuanced stuff about your ratios, how much bitterness do you have in a beer, how much sugar do you have in a beer, how much of your dark malts versus your light malts, your high alpha acid hops versus your low alpha acid hops, all of these different things. Going back to any baking or cooking, just because there's salt in a cookie recipe doesn't mean you want to dump a cup in there.
Yeah.
It's not going to be good. Beer is the same way. Just because we have a certain amount of hops or malt in one doesn't mean we want to triple it and still have a good beer. So there's certain parameters that we want to follow. We have a lot of guidelines to help us know if a beer is going to turn out well. There's a lot of history about making specific beer styles, between making American IPAs or British IPAs or American stouts or German pilsners or American lagers. We have a lot of guidelines from history that help us know kind of where we need to go at, where we need to target.
And then a lot of it is also experience of just, we've made a lot of beer, we've drank a lot of beer, and we have a general analysis of, our experience helps us to determine, like, is this beer that we just finished this week, is it good? We have a lot of times where we have a conversation about, I don't personally like this beer, but that doesn't mean it's a bad beer. Mm-hmm. The question I need to ask is this beer good, and is it a high quality that we want to serve? Because we all have our own personal tastes. I really like big hoppy IPAs. You may not. That doesn't mean that your distaste of one or my preference for one are important in actually answering, is this a good beer?
Because people do have a certain flavor. Like, I don't like hoppy IPAs. I don't mind the citrusy IPAs. Double IPAs usually work pretty well for me, but the real hoppy IPAs I don't like. So people do have different flavors, and so that's not your own. And you talked earlier about the home brewing and about not having enough people to try it out, and that's really important because you can't be the only voice on that, right? You have to have other people who say, no, I like this beer. You might not like it, but this is a good beer.
Perfect example is, I don't really like the beer that you're drinking right now.
The Honey Saison?
Yeah, it's but I can tell you I don't like it because it's not my personal palate.
Yeah.
But I can tell you it's a good beer. I believe it's balanced. I believe it's well fermented and it's well constructed. And that for people that do prefer that really bright, effervescent, florally character that beer has, it's wonderful.
Yeah.
But it's not my personal palate. But I'm still going to put it on tap because I over the course of the last 10 years or so, have enough experience in beer that I can tell you it's a good beer, but I can also tell you bluntly that I don't personally want to drink it.
Yeah. So another couple of things I wanted to ask you about. Your beers are named after birds, and I want to make sure we talk about why that is.
The short version is that my brother and I are nature geeks. We grew up living out in the middle of the country, and we're very fortunate to have the freedom to run and explore in the woods. And our parents took us up into the mountains a lot, out in Colorado and other parts of the country. And we just developed a love of the natural world. And when we started creating the brewery and started working on it, we knew that we needed some kind of branding theme. Mm-hmm. We knew that we needed, something to name our beers after, some rhyme or reason. And birds is what we picked on. It's just what we landed on. And it's been really fun because it also plays a little bit of homage back to the name of the brewery as well. So the name is Sandhills Brewing, and that's after a region of Kansas that we grew up in, just north of Hutchinson, that is the Sandhills. And it's a very unique part of the state that is truthfully like no other part of the state, at least from like a geological perspective, as well as some of the wildlife that we have, some of the plants that we have are different here than they are in most other parts of the state because our soil composition is almost all sand. Mm-hmm. And so we really wanted to play homage to that, to home, and to the love of nature that we had as my brother and I, and as our family and as a whole.
I've always loved that, though, and I love that you have these pictures of birds around here and that I can always know. Yeah. And it makes it easy for me because I know that the sparrow's one kind of beer and the meadowlark's another kind of beer, and I get all that.
It was also a little bit of a cheat, if you will, because it kind of took up a little bit. It gave us an easy way to come up with beer names as opposed to trying to be super creative.
Yeah.
I'm not going to pick on anybody, but there's a lot of beer names out there that are either really long about this, something ridiculous or fun, and they could be really memorable. My brother and I are not that creative people. So, we relied on, the ornithologists of the world, the scientists of the past to take all of these bird names, and they've given us a list because we have we have all these different birds that are native to Kansas and native to the U.S., and we've tried to use birds that are native to this area initially, and then we slowly kind of branched out and picked ones that either migrate through or that, we might see once in a while, or maybe we'll very intentionally take one that's, from the South American tropics. Yeah. But we have a pool of names to choose from, and so we don't have to be creative on it.
And I know when I see the barred owl, or I see the barred owl soaked in barrel or an oak barrel, I know that's probably going to be my beer.
Yeah.
Another thing I wanted to ask about is, in all of this, you talked at the beginning about kind of getting into this at the right time of the craft beer movement. I want to talk a little bit about that because for years and years and years in this country, it was largely Budweiser, Coors, Michelob, and that was what you got. You went to the liquor store, that's what you got. And the world has changed dramatically since then, right? Not only with places like yours, but you go to the liquor store and there's a variety of different types of beers. You can stock your fridge with any number of kinds of beers. Do you have any thoughts on what has created that? I mean, for years it seemed like people were happy to drink Budweiser. They were either a Budweiser person or a Coors person. Maybe somebody was a Michelob or a Miller person. But now we have hundreds and hundreds of varieties of beer. Every town I visit, I look for local breweries, kind of like you talked earlier. What kind of created that?
There's going to be so many different factors, and I think there's no way that we could pinpoint one or two reasons. And so I'm just going to spitball a few that come to mind. So one is, at least when it comes to small towns and small communities, like, for example, the reason that we as Sandhills Brewing, as this itty bitty little brewery in Hutchinson, Kansas exists, is going to be different from the reason that, say, Firestone Walker, which is still considered a craft brewery, a small local brewery, they're massive. Mm-hmm. The reason they exist and maybe started is probably going to be different than ours. But from a customer perspective, today, we have a much greater sense of wanting to support the small and the local business. And I really do believe that a lot of that has to do with the cascading effects of the internet. If we really want to get down to where that came from, the internet has been extremely important in helping recultivate a sense of local and a sense of identity. There is better access than ever, once again, because of the internet, to learning new skills. And so, it used to be, if we go back X number of decades, that if you were a person in a small town and you wanted to learn how to become a brewer, you had to travel a long ways to, go and learn from a master somewhere. Go and learn from the regional or the national brewer. That's not the case anymore. Yeah. We really, anybody with an internet connection can learn how to brew beer, can learn to make bread, can learn to make coffee, can learn to make t-shirts. Whatever your craft is, it's accessible. And so I think accessibility of information has a huge amount to do with the proliferation of not just craft beer, but all of these other businesses, this resurgence of appreciating local, because not only do we have a better appreciation of local, we have a better access to people to be able to create the businesses in those local places. We have a lot of exposure now to things that are not normal to us. We always claim that Hutchinson is a Bud Light town or a Coors Light or a Miller Light. It's a light beer town. And I remember that was one of the big conversations that we had when we were first opening up. But we as consumers have a much greater access to breaking out of our comfort zone. Yeah. And again, I do believe a lot of that comes back to the internet. And some of this is my own bias because I do come from the software world, and I ran a software company for a long time, and I worked exclusively on the internet, and so I'm a little bit biased. I'm not gonna lie. I have rose-colored glasses probably, yeah. but I think it's really important still. We have trends that we follow around the country. And, regardless of what industry we're in, whether we're in fashion or we're in beer or we're in food, there's trends that happen all around the country. And one of the things that's really interesting about living in Hutchinson, Kansas, which is just about as close to the center of the country as we can get. Yep. We're not quite, but we're pretty close.
Very, very close.
Is that we have an opportunity to watch trends from east to west, north and south, etc., and watch as those trends come in. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I've noticed that I think is probably
measurably true is that trends start on the coast, they start on the periphery, and they move their way in. And so, we see things that start in California and start in New York, or start in Florida and start in Washington State or Portland, etc. And they move in, and they come into Idaho, and they come into Virginia, and then they come into Kentucky, they come into Michigan, etc. They slowly work their way in, and eventually they make their way to Kansas. And so, as a business owner, one of the things that's kind of convenient about that is that we've been able to watch these trends.
Yeah.
Not only from like what businesses are working or not working, but also of like, okay, so in this brewery business, which seems pretty cool, it seems fun, and I like beer, we can watch as these trends come in and see what's popular before it's ever even a thing here.
Yeah. But you see what they did on the coast, you see the mistakes they made, you see the way consumers reacted to it. And it does. Living in Kansas sometimes has its disadvantages, right? But sometimes it has its advantages.
Absolutely.
And the advantage is that you can watch all the mistakes other people made.
Yeah.
You can see how consumers respond. And you can say, when I do this in Kansas, we have like a whole library of mistakes and successes that we can build on, right?
So let me give you an example of that. Is when we first started working on this brewery, we had decided that we were going to open up exclusively making barrel-aged sour beers. That was our plan. That was our game plan. We had seen there was a couple of breweries around the country, predominantly in California and on the East Coast, that had done it to seemingly wild success, and we're like, that's what we want to do. Mm-hmm. We love sour beer. It's something that we feel that we are very good at doing, that we have a good grasp and understanding of. Let's do that. The fault in that plan, however, is once again recognizing that trends have to come in, and they take years to come in. If you imagine something that starts on one coast, it might be 15 years before it gets here to the center of the country, like almost to the center of the center as we can get.
Yeah.
And so, we thought we were going to start and do just okay sours. And then we realized, actually, that's probably a terrible idea, because while we will find a few customers that definitely want that and latch onto it and become ardent supporters, we also have to recognize and we have to understand the community that we're opening up in and what our average audience is. And we realize a very simple truth, which is every person that comes through our door that doesn't have something that they like is probably not going to come back.
Yeah.
Which in hindsight seemed like a stupidly obvious duh. but as we're slowly building this business plan and thinking about it, that was not the early assumption. And so when we realized that, which was thankfully prior to us opening, we did pivot and say, actually what we should do is we should target a broad menu of drinkers, a broad palette. And we should try to make something that is approachable for most everybody. We recognize that we're in a Bud Light, Coors Light, Miller Lite town. We need to make sure that we have something approachable to them. We also need to make sure that we have something that is slightly out of their comfort zone for anybody that wants to take the opportunity to expand their palate, expand their horizon of what they know beer to be.
Yeah.
And then we also need to have something that is at the far end, the opposite world for the people that are super adventurous, or that the ones that have already come in and already have ventured there before.
Absolutely. And I will tell you, even though I will say nobody makes a sour beer quite like you guys do, I still just don't like sour beers.
And that's
I just
okay.
don't.
That is something that we knew to be true from the beginning, is that there are people that have a sour and immediately like, this is all I want to drink.
Yeah.
I was one of those people.
Yeah.
We know that there are people that slowly build up an appetite for them. We know that there are people that will just never, ever get there. And there are people that maybe will eventually get there.
Yeah.
And it takes all types of palates. And I'm glad that we didn't open that way, because it wouldn't have worked well.
Yeah, but to your point on that, the people who didn't know about sour beers, who tasted it probably for the first time with you, they love it. Yeah. They like you've created a sour market here that didn't exist before.
Which is really interesting, because it's
as I look back on it, it's funny to say we originally wanted to be a sour-only brewery. We realized that was a mistake. So we opened up and we make some of everything now. But our best-selling beer, which surprised the heck out of me, is our tart wheat sour beer.
Yeah.
And, so we originally planned to make sours, decided that was a terrible idea, and then it turns out that our sour beer is our best-selling beer.
Yeah, people love it.
Yeah, it totally surprised us.
And it did really create a market that didn't exist before, because nobody was like, what's a sour beer? I didn't know what a sour beer was.
I think that's one of the reasons why it did work, is because it was something that was so radically different than what the expectations were, that there's a lot of people that latch onto that. They get surprised and they realize that was a very pleasant surprise.
Yeah.
And it just, that's the thing that sticks for them.
That's awesome. Well, normally I have a last question for people that's something along the lines of, what is one thing that you wish people knew that they don't know, or they could know if they didn't do this? But I have a different question I want to ask you. Do you have a favorite beer?
Here that we make? Or just in general?
In general.
Ooh. It's actually a really not straightforward answer, because I have many, many favorites. I tend to pick my favorites based off of certain experiences or memories associated with them. So, if you ask me what is the favorite beer that we make here, I'm going to tell you it's Barred Out. And that's because it's the beer that I want to drink the most often, but it's also because that's the beer that that my wife, it was her favorite, and that it was the first one that I convinced her that she liked something that was darker in color. Yeah. But then if you ask me, what is my favorite beer that's made from around the world, I might tell you a beer called Atrial Rubicite from down in Jesterking, which is in Austin, Texas, because the experience that I had drinking that beer for the first time was so magical and amazing. I go back and have that beer now, and I don't enjoy it the same way. And so sometimes it's a memory, sometimes it's what was created, and then other times I think it's, it's Chickadee, which is our Berliner Weiss, our tart wheat beer, because it's our best-selling beer. It's the thing that, kind of made our name, if you will. Yeah. And then, other days it's basic Pilsner from Casey Beer Co., because I just love classic German Pilsners. And so I don't really have a favorite, is the honest answer. I have beers that fit moods. I have beers that fulfill wonderful memories and times and place. I can think of a time in a hotel room with a friend at a conference where I drank a big double or triple barrel aged imperial stout from Deschutes Brewing up in Portland, Oregon, or Bend, Oregon, and had a wonderful evening after that. That memory will stick with me forever, and I'll always think about that beer and the time that me and that friend had. We were supposed to be working, and instead we're like, let's sit around and drink a crazy beer. But that's not my favorite beer. Yeah. But I love the memory associated with it. So
well, and I think this is a thing that we didn't really have much time to get into, but I think we can kind of talk about this a little bit. The thing about beer is not just beer, right? Mm-hmm. Beer is fellowship. Yeah. Beer is memories. Beer is bonding. Yes. Beer is opening up. Beer is a lot more than just beer.
Well, I think a good answer to that is we did not open a brewery because we wanted to make beer.
Yeah.
We opened a brewery because we wanted to create a community space that provided the type of space and environment that we felt was missing from our area and that we wanted to be part of. Beer is the product that brings people in, but it's not the thing that makes people stay.
Yeah. And I know one of the things I appreciate about your place is that I come in here, I order a beer, but there's 8 people, 10 people in this building at any given point in time that I know, that I can talk to, and I feel totally comfortable.
It's a community. It really is.
Yeah.
And, when we first really started thinking about it, I'm going to say something that's really cheesy, but I remember a phone call that I had with my brother when I was first, when we were first kind of committing to, are we going to do this or are we not? And I remember calling him because I had found the building, mm-hmm. and I found that it was for rent, and I thought, I think this might be the space that we could use. is it crazy to try to open a brewery here? It might take us a couple of years. It's probably going to be a lot more expensive than we think it is, but do you think we can do it? And I mean, it literally gave me the super cheesy answer of, be the change that you want to see in the world. Mm-hmm. I wanted to have a community space in Hutchinson, Kansas that was also, that served the beer that I wanted to drink, and I wanted to share our product, our, my passion with, and our passion with our customers. And I wanted to provide it in a space that I wanted to spend time in. When we moved back here in 2013, I missed those community spaces that I used to have, where so many people knew each other and so many people came in as this is their bonding time. This is their place for community for sitting down and having a conversation. This is their meeting place. This is where they they bring their laptop to work when they need to get out of the house, or they're out of the office, or they're meeting a colleague, or they're meeting having a business meeting, whatever the purpose is. That was the space, and I didn't feel like it existed here. Yeah. And so I wanted to create it.
And you did. And I'm really glad that you did.
Well, I appreciate that.
It's turned out great for me, because
okay.
I love your beer and I love your space.
Well, and that's all that we wanted. That's what we wanted to create. Create a space that people like yourself and many others would come in and have that type of feeling about it.
Well, thank you for doing that, and thank you for taking some time to sit down and visit with me today.
It's been my pleasure, Jason.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank a few of the people who've helped make that podcast and Hutch possible. My son Mitchell Probst wrote and recorded the music for the show. Jenny Brigette put together some great graphics and promotional art. And Chris Acker helps overcome my mistakes to produce a great sounding product every episode. That podcast and Hutch is made possible through a collaboration between the Hutchinson Arts and Culture Collective and Salt City Sound. They're working to bring resources and infrastructure to support art, music, and storytelling in our community. If you have an idea for your own podcast, reach out to them at podcasts@saltcitysound.net. If you enjoy that podcast and Hutch, be sure to subscribe and share it with all your friends. You can also help support this production by subscribing to thatguyandhutch.substack.com or by emailing me at thatguyandhutch@gmail.com to learn about sponsorship opportunities. Thanks for listening, and I hope you'll join us again next week.
A Salt City Sound production.